one of my earliest experiences that I had with anything strange or paranormal. I was around the age of 6 or 7. Now, I've been very spiritual my whole life. I've seen things for most of my life. I've been very sensitive for as long as I can remember. But I remember from the age of 6 or 7, that was when those are the earliest memories that I have of seeing anything of that strangeness. I don't remember anything before the age of 7. I don't know why. Anything paranormal or psychic related, I don't remember seeing much before that. But between the ages of 6 and 7, I remember I would always see energy, or just this very clear layer in the air that I would see. For the longest time, I thought everybody saw it. Let me try and describe. To me, it was almost as if I was looking at you get those safety doors that have those safety nets. It was as if I was looking through a safety net, almost like this very clear, sheer layer, like you're looking through a very sheer lace curtain. You can see very easily through it. You can see behind it, you can see through it. You can almost ignore it completely. But it's this very thin, sheer layer. It had no color. It was just a very clear layer. And I remember at night I would always see this layer, and I would see objects moving in the layer. And to fall asleep, I would always create things in the layer. So I would imagine things moving in this sheer curtain, I want to call it that. I would see things moving in this curtain, and I remember to fall asleep, I would always imagine things moving in it to fall asleep. I wouldn't daydream. I would just imagine. I would create objects in this layer, and sometimes I would scare myself so badly, and I remember I would just sleep with my mother at the time. But I remember from a very young age, there was always this layer that I would see. And for the longest time, I thought everybody saw this layer. And I remember once telling my stepdad of what I would see, and I remember him saying that he didn't see it. And then I started to realize as I got older that not everybody sees this curtain. And for the longest time, when I was a lot older, I thought it was something wrong with my eyes. I thought my eyes, there was something wrong with my eyes. I thought I was seeing things. I thought it was just me. When I was very young, I thought everybody, it was so normal to just see this layer. And as I've gotten older, I've started to see color in the layer, almost as if it was an aura. And that's when I thought it was energy, but when I was very young, I didn't know what it was. But my whole life, there's just been this layer that I've been seeing. My whole life, I've been very in tune, if you want to call it that. I've been very open. My family is very spiritual. I'm of a spiritual family. I've grown around it my whole life. All the women in my family are very, very in tune, very spiritual, very divine, very artistic and creative. I believe that I am a descendant of witches, to be honest, because all the women, both sides of my family, are very, very in tune and very, very psychic and sensitive. So I've been around it my whole life. So in that way, I'm also very sensitive. I'm also very aware and in tune, and I've had my own paranormal psychic experiences. For some reason, this is very hard for me to share with the world and with people. I'm very spiritual and very psychic, even though I don't always admit it. It's been very hard for me to share this part of me. You know, I've had experiences with other people. I've learned the hard way to not share this part of me so easily with others, with people who are very closed-minded, who don't understand. I've learned the hard way to not just be open about it with anyone, because of certain experiences I've had with others and their judgments and their criticism and their fear. People are very afraid. They are very afraid of things that are behind the veil. And when you meet people that see right through it, that are very much more in the spiritual world than in the physical world, it triggers people and it scares people, and people don't understand. So I've had a lot of experiences with other people and expressing the side. But I've recently come across a video of someone talking about their paranormal encounters and experiences, and it made me feel very understood. I felt a little less crazy when I watched this woman's beautiful video. I felt heard, I felt understood, and it made me realize that there are more people that experience these crazy, beautiful, wonderful things. And, you know, for a really long time, it's always been hush-hush. It's always been something that people don't talk about. But more and more people are experiencing these things. And it's just so easy to ignore it and push it aside. That's what I've done for a really, really long time with my experiences. But watching that beautiful lady's video, it brought a lot of things up, and it made me feel empowered, and it gave me the courage to share my own experiences. So I'm trying to encourage myself to share. This isn't something I've done before, but I'm going to try my best to describe everything, to share as much as I can. But yeah, for the longest of time, when I was very young, there wasn't much that I saw. It was just this layer, this energy layer. For the longest time it was that. I experienced a death in the family very, very young. I don't have much memory of that time, but I think during that period a lot of my third eye was closed. I think that time for me was very intense, and for some reason I can't remember. I don't have any memory of anything, but my third eye was closed temporarily. Again, I am around very spiritual people. My mother's very spiritual. She is a Reiki master, a Reiki teacher, a shaman, a seer, a ascended master, an earth angel, a light worker, everything. She's an alchemist. She's everything. And I share a lot of that with her. I too am very sensitive, a big empath, an alchemist in my own way. But yeah, for the longest time, there wasn't much that I really experienced until I was around 10 or 11. And I started seeing figures of people. So I've never seen people. They were always just make-outs of people. So the energy layer that I've always seen, it was very light, it was very open. And a lot of these figures that I would see were very light. They were very good. They were very healing. They were guardians, they were guides, they were angels. They were higher beings that I became very, very in tune with. Spirit teams, guides, angels, all of that. A lot of the experiences that I've experienced have been very good. I have had bad experiences, but I will get into that much later on. But during this time, what I would see was very good. I would see a lot of figures. I remember waking up one night and there was this one figure standing with its back towards me. And it was looking at my shelf that I had in my room, and it had all these little fairy ornaments on them. And I was looking at the fairies, and then I think it noticed that I was awake, because I woke up and I saw this figure, and it turned around, and it was very good. It was very healing. It was very light. So I wasn't afraid seeing things at a very early age. It was only much later that I became very fearful once I had the negative experiences. But I wasn't afraid during this time when I would see things. And I remember this figure turning around and it walking towards my bed. And I remember pretending to be asleep. And I think it leaned down, but I had my eyes closed because I was pretending to be asleep. But it had leaned down over my bed. And that was, I think, one of the first bigger experiences that I had. And I remember telling my mother about seeing this figure, and she said, "Oh, maybe it's a guide. Maybe maybe it's part of your spirit team guide, something like that. I've had way more of those experiences. Very good energy, very healing, not bad at all. A lot of those figures that I saw during that time of me being 10 and 11, they were made of light. It would be dark in the room, and this figure would walk in, and the whole room would just be light. So I never experienced much fear. Something's flying around. And then the second experience that I had that I can remember was I was walking out the bathroom because I had showered, and I was walking out, and there was a mirror kind of in the little hallway that we had, and I was looking at the mirror, and I kind of saw something in the corner of my eye to my right, and I turned around, and there was this shadow, kind of like figure, and I saw it for about a split second, and then it was gone. And that figure was standing in my parents' bedroom. So that was like a split second. And then there was another more amazing experience, actually. I was awake. I was always awake when I would see things. There was a figure that walked into my room, and obviously being a kid, there's always things on the floor. I would always put my books on the floor instead of on a shelf. So I would have these like stacks of books on my floor. And I remember this one walking in and just casually picking up a book. But they didn't pick up the physical book. I didn't see the book floating. They just casually picked up the book and walked across the room and sat in the corner and read it. And the crazy thing was that it was as if they picked up a spirit version of the book. It wasn't the actual physical book, but it reminded me a lot of the movie Coco, where in one of the scenes where they're celebrating the Day of the Dead, and there's this one scene where there's a whole big table of a feast, and you see all these skeletons coming to celebrate and eat and just celebrate that very special day. And in one of the scenes, there's this skeleton man that reaches out for a turkey leg or a chicken leg, and he leans out to the physical leg and he grabs out a spirit leg, a spirit version of the leg, and he eats it. I remember much later on thinking of that movie, but I had never ever experienced that before, and that's why it was such an amazing, interesting thing to experience, because it actually really did blow me away. So that happened, and I remember during that time, I think my clairaudience was starting to be activated more. I would watch a lot of movies with my parents, and I always have this inner dialogue, this inner voice. I talk to myself a lot. But I remember watching a movie with my parents, and many times I asked myself questions in my head. I talk to myself in my head. And I remember watching a movie in another language, in German, and I remember watching a scene, and I asked myself, what language is that? Because I was confused. And I heard my voice in my head, not me, my voice in my head saying German. And that was the first time that I had ever experienced anything like that. I remember another time I was watching another movie, but a different time. It was a movie on a different timeline, maybe late Victorian kind of set. It was set in that time. And I remember watching a movie, and in one of the scenes, a carriage was driving by, and in my head I heard my voice say, "I remember that." Very, very clear. And I would always tell my mom about these experiences because she was very spiritual. She was very, very aware. My stepdad on the other side was not. He likes to call himself a muggle. He calls himself a muggle. And my mom is the warlock, the witch, the shaman, the seer. She's amazing in her way, but I would always tell her these experiences that I would have. But yeah, I had a lot of that, where I would talk to myself in my head, but it wasn't me. My clairaudience is very tied to my writing. I feel that I channel a lot in my writing, in my voice. I get a lot of lyrics in my head, and I always write them down into my writing. So I feel my art is very tied to my ability, if you want to call it that. There's a fly still flying around. But yeah, I started experiencing a lot of that, where I would talk to myself. And then this was much later on. I was probably 12 when this happened. We had recently moved from Cape Town to Gauteng. I live in South Africa. So we'd moved from Cape Town to Gauteng, Pretoria. And I was having a sleepover with my cousin at the time. And we were staying at my granny's house, my stepdad's mother's house. Because she lives in Gauteng, so we had moved. And I remember I was having a sleepover with my cousin, and my granny lives in a retirement village. You can probably expect what I'm gonna talk about. But she lives in a retirement village, and we were having a sleepover, and usually the things that I had experienced before this wasn't too crazy. It wasn't too intense. But I remember we had to share a single bed. Or it was a 3/4 size bed, I can't remember. But we had to share a bed. And I remember one night waking up to another energy figure, but their face was in my face. And I think they actually woke me up. That's why I actually woke up. Because they were kind of poking in my face, I think, trying to wake me up. And this whole experience happened in a split of a second. It was so quick. I woke up, I was Jamaica, I was confused. I woke up with this person in my face, and then a blip of a second, it wasn't even a second, they were standing by the door. They were standing by right just behind the door frame, and they wouldn't come into the room, but a split second before that they were right in my face. And then I was a little confused, and then I turned to my right, and there's these two figures standing by the cupboard side. So the cupboards are here, the mirror's here, and the door is right there. Then right next to the door is a set of drawers, and then there's the bed, a very small room, and then here's the window. But the two figures were standing a little bit apart, right by the cupboard doors, and this other figure was standing by the door. And it was weird to me because this figure wouldn't come into the room. It was almost as if it was hesitating or afraid to come into the room, whereas before the energy was totally different when it was in my face. And then I remember turning to the right and seeing these other two figures, and it was so strange. They were like statues. It was like they were like guards, like, you know, security guards. They just stand there and they watch. They just stand there like a statue, and that's all they did. They just stood there. And I remember this other figure by the door kind of glancing at the other two figures, kind of afraid to go into the room, like those two guards were stopping him from coming into the room, like he wasn't allowed to enter. And I remember that figure kind of leaning his arm on the set of drawers, kind of patiently waiting, because they really badly wanted to come into the room, but they weren't allowed. It was it was really, really, really crazy. But these two figures, they just stood there, kind of like guarding, protecting, and it felt as if they were there before the figure came. Like it happened so quickly, like they were there before, because the reaction was so quickly, the response was so quickly to stand there and guard or something. I don't know. I've experienced some experiences a lot with earthbounds and attachments of spirits. I don't like calling them ghosts. I will not call them ghosts. There's a lot of stereotypes of ghosts, and I don't really like that term. I remember telling my mom later on when I got home about the experience, and she said that it was an earthbound, probably wanting to come. I feel my aura is very magnetic. Things are always coming to me or are attracted to me, kind of like a moth to a flame. I've been that way always. I think I have a very healing aura, or I am a healer, and so things that are struggling or are dark just naturally are attracted to me in some way. And I remember her saying that it was probably an earthbound, a ghost spirit, wanting to come into my energy field, or wanting help, or just very drawn to my space. And then there were those two guards not letting them enter. So that was the first experience that I had with an earthbound. That happened when I was 12. Later on in that year, I had experienced another attachment of some kind. The house that we lived in at that time was very, very haunted. It was very, very dark. It was very, very cold. And there was something wrong with the land, with the earth. I remember us digging in the garden, and we found herb bags full of herbs that we had figured out the owners put in there to maybe help the earth. We had assumed that they knew the house was haunted, and so they had planted those bags to maybe help with it. I don't know. The house was weird. It was dark. The ground was bad. The earth was really, really, really bad. And I remember my mother saying that it was the earth that was the problem. The earth was very dark. And so that's why there was all these dark energies within the house, because it was the earth that was the problem. But I remember that house was very, very haunted. And this is when the dark experiences kind of start to happen. I remember one night I had my mattress on the floor. I did not have a base or a frame or anything. My mattress was just on the floor, so I slept on the floor on my bed mattress. So I was very to the ground. And I remember there was a portal in my room. Of course, it was in my room. Of all places, it was in my room. I remember I would see this portal, this hole in the wall. And I remember I would always see child-sized figures, hundreds of them coming out of this hole and just walking out of my bedroom door. And I remember I would always take the blanket and cover my face. And they would just, hundreds of them would just come out of this hole and walk into the house. And then another time, it sounds like an actual horror movie. You know, contortionists, how they just bend and you watch these movies with demons and possessions and they walk like spiders up the wall and their head goes full 360 and their joints twist and their arms do all these crazy things. I remember I have never seen something so black in my entire life. But there was this thing that came out of the wall. It was upside down, but its legs were sort of bent and crooked like a spider, and its head was upside down, and it was twisting it like that all the time, and its mouth was wide open, and it looked like it looked, try and imagine a demon, that's what it looked like. It was those spider things in a horror movie, straight out of a horror movie, and it was black as the depths of the ocean. It was really, really black. It was really, really dark. And it was crawling out of the wall along with all these child-sized figures coming out of the room. And it was coming out of the wall. And again, I said my mattress was very close to the ground, so I was on ground level. So here's the ground, I'm here, and this thing is standing here by the wall. So it was right at my level. And you can imagine how even more terrifying that was. But I remember it crawling towards my bed. And I don't know how I managed to move, but I turned on my light, my bedside light, and all of it was just gone. That I think was the most terrifying experiences that I've ever had. My mother did a lot of rituals in that house, cleansing rituals to cleanse the space, to cleanse the earth. She did a lot of banishing rituals. She did a lot of cleansing. She did a lot of holy water activation. She did everything she could. She called upon Archangel Michael. She called upon Asna, Mother God. She called upon everything, but no matter what she did, the things always kept coming back. They would be gone for a week. Everything would be gone for a week, but it would always come back, and she said that it was the earth. It was the earth that was the problem, and no matter what she did, she couldn't get rid of them because of the earth. So that was the first terrifying experience that I had, and that's why I'm so, now to this day, I'm still very terrified of seeing things. But we're going to get into that another time. I had another experience. I always slept with my door open. I don't know why, I just did. At the time I didn't close my door, now I do. But during that time, my door would always be open. And I remember seeing this little fairy-sized figure kind of walking by my door and peeping in to the room, like a fairy-sized figure peeping into my room. And that was the only time I ever saw a mini person, a fairy, whatever you want to call it. That was the first time that I had ever experienced and lost. There would always be a girl that would walk down the hall, that would walk down the passage. And she would always have pigtails. I didn't see a proper girl, but it was the make-out of a girl. It was the figure of a girl. So an energy girl that I would see. And again, there was a portal in my room that we eventually closed. My mother closed. I had a dream in that house. I am a very lucid dreamer. I have very lucid dreams, very, very vivid dreams. I travel a lot when I sleep. I live lives when I sleep. I swear I've lived so many lives within this one life. But I go everywhere when I sleep. And I had this one dream, and it woke me up. But I had this dream where there was this woman dressed in white, in a white gown, a sleeping gown. Yes, from a horror movie. Picture that from a horror movie, and her hair was dirty, her body was dirty, and the hair kind of went down her face. And she was walking down the passage, and then she stopped at my door, and she turned around and she walked towards me. And then as soon as she got to me, I jerked up, and I woke up. My mom said she had an experience where she saw me walking into the kitchen, but that wasn't me walking into the kitchen. She said she experienced a lot of copies. So she would see me walking down passage, but then I would come out of the room a totally different time. I remember once I left that house to stay with my grandparents in Cape Town because it just got too much to me. It got too much. I was the most affected in that house. I was the most haunted. I was the most affected. But I remember moving away for a few months because it just got too intense. And I remember my mom saying that I have a little sibling, and during that time she was a toddler. And my mother said that she fell, or she was pushed, or she fell or tripped, and she hit her head on the table. And she screamed and she cried. And my mom said as soon as she hit the table, she heard a woman cackling and laughing, and she got so scared that she ran out the house. I also experienced laughing. My mom would always do rituals in the morning, cleansing rituals in the morning. And I remember I just woke up and she was doing her cleansing. It became a very, very normal thing. She would cleanse all the rooms, everywhere. And I remember her walking down the passage, her walking down the hall where the bedrooms were. And I saw this shadow. of an old woman following behind her. And as the shadow followed behind her, I heard a cackling laugh, like a witch laugh. And again, I was very big on clairaudience. Again, I spoke to myself a lot. And I heard in my head, this is very funny, but I heard in my head myself saying something like, she sounds like a sheep, or that sounds like a sheep. I think I have very funny guides or spirits around me that are very good, that are very, guides, angels, the good energies. I think they were trying to kind of lighten the mood, so they kind of made fun of her laugh. Yeah, I heard her going down the passage and laughing and cackling. Like I said, the ground was very bad. That was probably the reason why the house was the way that it was. I remember seeing a lot of shadows in that house, shadow figures that would just wave. In my room, they would wave at me. I would hear a lot of whispers, and there would be some entities. Jack Frost and the Guardians, that movie where there's Santa Claus, there's Jack Frost, there's the Tooth Fairy Lady, and then there's the Sandman and the rabbit, the Easter Bunny. And then in that movie there's the boogeyman. Some of the entities that I would see were very, very black, were very, very dark. And the best way that I can describe what it looked like was the boogeyman from the Guardians with Jack Frost. I'm not sure if that's actually the movie's name. I know that sounds terrifying, but that is the best way that I can describe what those entities looked like. They had very, very long heads. And the boogeyman's hair, it kind of sticks out, like it's black and it sticks out. So it makes the head look very, very long. And the boogeyman has this black thing that he wears with this black cloak, or just very, very black. And some of the entities that I would see were like the boogeyman. They looked like the boogeyman from the Jack Frost movie. I would see Death Eaters. I don't know if that's their names, but from one of the Harry Potter movies, where Harry's godfather, and when he escapes from the prison, and those monsters come to find him, with that train scene, where those shadow creatures, when they come in and they kind of suck the life from you, I would see a lot of those things coming out of the hole. They would fly and they would shoot out of the window, but I would see a lot of those. I remember being taunted a lot. There was this one dark, very, very dark one that would sit on my bed, and it would lean its head into my face, like right into my face, and scare me and taunt me. And I remember I would just cry. And there were a few times where I had guides around, angels around, guardians around. My mom would call upon a lot of angels to protect me at night. I don't think I would have survived that house without my mom, but yeah. I remember these light beings were in my room, and all the dark shadow beings would be by my door, and they couldn't come in. And I remember the spider thing being by my door, and these light beings were turned away from the door. Their back was away from the door, and this spider thing tried crawling into the room, and this one light being turned around and tried to kick it out, like just kicked their leg, like karate kicked. Tried kicking it out, and they weren't allowed into the room. I was very protected during this time. I remember one would lie next to me on my bed, and eventually I would fall asleep. But yeah, there would always be this one lying next to me. And it always made me feel better. I could finally fall asleep. I never slept in that house. I remember when there was a lot of the calling upon angels. I remember lying in my bed, and I would see this huge light. And I remember seeing this figure holding a sword down like that. So yeah, I was very protected during that time. You know, the angel with the sword. I had one experience with light beings, with my guides and angels, where there was one that showed me a baby that was holding out a baby. And at that time I was very confused, because I was like, why are you showing me a baby? Did a baby die? And I thought a baby had died. And I remember I would call my mom at night and I told her about it. And then much later, I realized that that baby was a metaphor, and that they were showing me the baby to tell me that I was going through a rebirth, and I was going through a transformation. I've experienced a lot of deaths and rebirths and transformations spiritually. I've gone through a lot of healing. I've done a lot of alchemy. I've gone through a lot of transformations, and I'm a very, very different person now than what I was then. But I remember now I understand what that meant. But then I was very, very confused when they showed me a baby. But during that time I was going through a rebirth, or they were telling me that I was going to go through a rebirth, and that then I was going through a death. I was going through an ending. And endings are very, very hard. But maybe they were telling me that I was about to go through a birth. You know, transformation and death and rebirth are very hard. But spiritually, I was going through something. I was going through changes. During that time, I struggled a lot. I was very depressed. I was very alone. During that big move from Cape Town to Gauteng, I started homeschooling. So that whole year, I was very isolated. I was very alone. I went through a big isolation period for a really, really long time, even after that house. And for 2 years after that, I was still very much in isolation. I had to go through my healing journey, and I had to heal, and I had to alchemize, and I had a lot of rebirths and deaths and awakenings. I feel that house, that beginning of the year with the sleepover that I said, that I think was the beginning of my awakening, kind of like the dark night of the soul that I had gone through. The next year after that house experience, I had gone through a really dark time, but the haunted house, I think, was the start of that huge spiritual awakening. and that learning who I am as a soul, and being a light worker and being a healer and all those beautiful, wonderful things. But I remember seeing that baby and not knowing what it meant. But now I know what it meant. I was very supported during that time. I was very loved in that time. I didn't feel it, but I was loved and supported, and I was protected. I've struggled a lot with feeling alone. I've struggled a lot with feeling supported and loved throughout my journey. There was another experience that my mother said there was a spirit trapped in the garage of that house. So she cleansed the garage, she had to cleanse. Weird things like that would happen. Eventually I left the house. Like I said, I took a break from the house because it just got too much. Everybody in the house was angry. My father was angry. It sort of fed off everybody, and there was a very hard time in the family. There was a lot of fighting. So I left, and I went to go stay with my nana and my pops back in Cape Town. And I remember before the big move from Cape Town to Joburg, we had stayed there for 2 months before moving. And when I stayed there, I never saw spirits in that house. But when I went to go stay there, my mom obviously cleansed me before I left, so nothing would follow me back to Cape Town. So I had no attachments. I thought I had no attachments. No bad entities from that house followed me. But I did have an experience with another earthbound. But I will get into that soon. In my nana's house, there was a lot of Khoisan. There was a lot of Khoisan in that house. Khoisan are the indigenous people of South Africa. So the Khoi, the Khoisan, they are the indigenous tribes of South Africa. And I remember her house had Khoisan spirits. And I remember a friend of my mother's coming over. She's also a shaman, a healer, and she came in the house to figure out what was going on with the spirits, because everywhere I went, I was seeing spirits, I was seeing ghosts. Even after I took a break from that house, I was still experiencing a lot of activity, and then I eventually asked my mom to close my third eye, to stop me seeing things, because I was being so haunted and so badly experiencing everything. And I remember her saying that there were Khoisan spirits in the house. And I remember us going to I remember us buying these wooden runes kind of things, but they had Khoisan markings on them. And I remember this friend telling us to place it downstairs in the house, just to let the spirits know that we see them, and we know that they're there, and we respect them, because that was also very much their space. that was taken away from them, and the energy lightened up a lot in that house. I remember I always slept on the couch because I was so afraid to sleep downstairs, because there was the first level, which was the house that had my nana and pops's bedroom, and then downstairs was the other bedrooms, and I was so afraid to sleep downstairs. And I remember one night I was sleeping on the couch and I heard a male's voice praying or singing a mantra, something. I don't know what language it was in, but it was an African language that I don't know which language it was, but I heard it clear as day, a male voice praying. Doing a mantra or singing, I don't know, but it scared the hell out of me. And then we had taken a trip to East London. That's where all my family lives. I was born in East London, so I remember we took a trip there to see my family because I was struggling a lot during that time. I think that was the hardest times of my life. I was struggling a lot with my depression and stuff like that. We had taken a break and they decided to go on a trip with me so I could maybe feel better or just to take some things off me. The holiday house that we had lived in, it was kind of like a room. It was a single bed for me, and then there was a queen size bed for them, for my nana and pops. And like I said, wherever I went, I would see things. I remember seeing a little kid, a spirit kid, underneath my nana and pops' bed. And I remember going, please stop haunting me, please stop haunting me. Because I would always see things, and that whole year, I was just, no matter where I went, nothing would follow me, but everywhere I went, I would always see spirits. And I was just tired of it. I was afraid and I was tired. And I remember seeing this little boy underneath the bed. And then under my bed, I saw a woman crawling out from under my bed and kind of holding the little boy's hand. And it gave me this energy feeling of that they were hiding, almost hiding. And I remember her grabbing the little boy's hand, and I started crying, and I put the blanket over my head, just wanting to get rid of it. I remember I also experienced an earthbound attachment of a woman. I think my aura was very magnetic at that time. So no matter where I went, things would always come to me. This is the second time that I've experienced an earthbound, but I remember when I tried to picture the spirit in my head, I saw a woman wearing a grieving dress with a veil over her head with really, really dark circles under her eyes when I tried to picture this poor soul. But I remember in Pretoria, she was with me. She would lean on my cupboard door and she would just, I didn't even notice that she was there most of the time, but there was a very lost energy to her. She had a very lost feeling, she was just lost and she was confused. And she followed me to Cape Town, and then when we went on the trip as well to try get away. And I remember there was a table. It was a one-room holiday house, so there was a bed and then there was a table. And I remember seeing her just walking around the table, walking around and around and around and around. And she would just walk around the table, like this lost, paranoid feeling. And then I remember back in Cape Town, when I was sleeping downstairs. The timeline is very mixed up, I'm sorry. I remember I was lying in the bed downstairs and she was sort of sitting on my bed, her back towards me. And I couldn't even notice that she was there. Her energy was very, very low. I couldn't notice her that much. And I remember seeing the energy of her, like seeing her energy figure sitting with her back towards me on the bed, and there was a TV in the room. And I remember looking at the TV and seeing clear as day a woman wearing a black dress and a veil. And then I remember, I was just thinking about it, and I remember getting to this energy where my heart got heavy, my chest physically hurt, and I was thinking about this woman, and the more and more I thought about her, the more and more I started feeling her emotion, her pain. And I remember talking to my mom about it, saying that it feels like somebody died, or she died, or somebody was killed, or she killed herself, or very, 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 very heavy. And I remember feeling the pain and the emotions, and I remember I started crying because I was feeling her pain or her experience. And she had told me that it was her son that died. And she was grieving. That's why she was wearing the grieving dress. And I remember my mom calling upon the woman version of God, the mother God, and she called upon her to take her back fully to the other side. And I remember laying in bed. It was nighttime. It was always nighttime. And I remember I was in the lounge and I was sleeping on the couch again. And I remember seeing this grieving woman again just hovering around. And then all of a sudden I saw this other woman standing across from her. And that was the woman version of God. And I remember these two women just standing, and it almost felt like they were talking to each other. And I was just sick and tired of seeing things, so I quickly got up and I ran and I turned on the light. And by then they were gone, and I never saw that woman again. I never saw that grieving woman again. I had an experience with my pops where I had told him about, they obviously knew all the things that were going on, and I remember him kind of freaking out and saying, when we were kids, we didn't mess with things, we didn't play with Ouija boards, and we didn't mess around with that stuff. And I remember him getting very upset and him not understanding what I was going through, and him saying we didn't play with Ouija boards and we didn't mess around with things, and misunderstanding the whole thing that I was experiencing. I did not choose that. My soul chose that before I was born. We all choose our experiences. Everything happens for a reason, but he did not understand what I was going through, and he said some hurtful things that really hurt me. And that's one of the few reasons why I don't tell people everything. I don't tell everybody everything with the things that I've experienced. Because people don't understand. They get very scared. So I had another experience that I forgot to add in. When I was younger, from 10 and 11, I forgot to add this part in, but I remember a figure, a guide sitting by my bed and kind of holding me. And I remember during this time, I hadn't yet learned that not everybody understands what you're going through, and not everybody sees spirits and is spiritual. And I remember making the huge mistake by telling my classroom what I was experiencing and saying, oh, there was this man and he was sitting on my bed. And I remember the whole class going quiet. And I remember everybody getting very uncomfortable. And I was telling them about the spirits that I see. And they got very, very uncomfortable. They got quiet. And I remember my teacher said she has a brother that's very spiritual. And so that's why I started telling the class about it, because we somehow got on the topic. I don't know how it happened, but I remember telling my teacher, and she got very uncomfortable and she got very, very quiet. And from that experience, it got into my head that I am not normal. That experience told me that all the things that I see, all the things that I've experienced are not normal. Because the reaction that I got from the people around me was not the reaction that I was expecting. And I realized at that point that I am very different. That the things that I see, not everybody sees. And it made me feel very outcasted. I didn't feel normal. And for a really long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. And that's also one of the reasons why I don't share these things with other people, because of those experiences that I've had and the reactions that I've gotten from other people. I've struggled a lot with feeling like an outcast and feeling different, being a black sheep. For a really long time, I really thought there was something wrong with me. And then, I always thought it was normal. Like, really in the beginning, when I started seeing things, I thought it was normal because my family is spiritual. I am spiritual. So I was around people that thought that was normal, that experienced that. So for a really long time, I thought everybody else did. And then that experience just knocked it into my brain that it's not normal and that maybe there's something wrong with me. So that's another experience that just made me not share it. I think that's all I'm going to do for this one video. I will do another one. But yeah, that was a very dark time in my life. All those experiences happened for a reason. Those experiences had triggered my awakening. it had triggered my healing journey. It had triggered the start to, I want to say, transformational birth, but it really was the beginning to me waking up to who I am on a soul level. During that time, I was very activated, I was very magnetic, and so everything dark and everything hurting, I would just be around, and that was for a reason. I went through those experiences for a reason. There is so much more that I need to share, but that's all I can do for one video. Eventually we moved out of that house. I eventually went back to that house after going on the trip, and we stayed there for a few more months because it was very hard for us to move, but eventually we moved. And after that experience, I didn't experience anything dark after that. I didn't experience attachments. I didn't experience dark entities, anything like that. But that experience had triggered so much growth and healing within me. Yes, it was very hard and it was very dark, but it triggered the awakenings and the healing and the alchemizing. Thank you for listening. I will do a part 2 if you want it. I just thought that this was important to share, to empower myself and maybe to empower other people, and to tell them, to show them that what they're experiencing is normal. It's not normal, but it is normal. You know, you feel crazy when you experience all these crazy things, and you experience such divine guidance and such divine intervention, and you see angels and you see guides and you see guardians and you see all these amazing things, and you're awakened. You're awakened to yourself. So you can feel very crazy. I will do a part 2 soon. Thank you for being understanding. If you don't want a part 2, I'm going to do it anyway, but if you don't want a part 2, that's fine. But I still feel it's important to share. I try and alchemize everything that I go through. Everything that I experience is meant to make me stronger. It's meant to empower me. So I take the struggles and I empower myself with it. I take the dark and I turn it to light. I try my best to take everything that has happened and help myself with it and help other people with it. So that is part 1. I will do more parts soon.